Hello and welcome, everyone. So excited to be here, excited for today's session. Um, my name is Latrice Torres. I am CEO of LeaderKeys Consultant, and I cannot tell you how excited I am to do today's session. I don't even think I slept last night because I was so excited about this and very excited for my very special guest that I'm going to have with us today. If you've been in one of my sessions, you know I just jump right into it. But definitely when you have questions, if there's anything that you want to say, you have some comments, make sure that you just pop them into the comments. I see most of them. I may not see all of them, but when I do, I will make sure that I acknowledge them. And we will leave some time at the end of this session for some Q&A. Today's session will be the first of a series of authentic and unapologetic conversations that I'm going to do monthly and have somebody really awesome to have that conversation with me. This month is Fair Housing Month, and we are asking the question, is fair housing in America fair? Really? Is it? And so we're going to stress test that. We're going to talk about that. And we really want you involved in this conversation. So make sure you jump in there. And what I'm going to do next is I'm actually going to just introduce my guest. And like I said, I'm so excited that I feel like I barely can even talk. So let me go ahead and get into it and do the introduction of Irving Cham. Irving Cham. So I don't even know where to start, but so I do have something written. So I'm just going to read that because that'll keep me honest. So Irving Cham, transitioning from humble beginnings to ambitious goals. Irving emerges as a versatile professional in the real estate field. With a wide range of effective strategies at his disposal, Irving is a pillar in the communities he serves, drawing over 15 years of experience in banking and real estate. So originally from Irvington, New Jersey, Irving embodies the determination, hard work, and resilience needed to overcome challenges and achieve one's goals. Throughout his career, he has held diverse roles and is the owner of a thriving property management business. His contributions to urban development in Essex County have garnered praise and recognition. As the Middlesex County District Manager for Coldwell Banker, Irving utilizes his interpersonal skills to recruit, develop, and mentor new agents, all aimed at nurturing company culture and fostering growth opportunities. So now you see why I had to read that, because Irving is awesome and I did not want to get that wrong at all. So without further ado, I'd like to bring Irving to the stage. So welcome, Irving.
Hey, Latrice, thank you so much. And Latrice had to tweak my bio, so that's why it sounds as good as it does. So thank you so much, Latrice. I really appreciate that.
Not a problem at all. Didn't need much. Your awesomeness was already in there, so I didn't need to do too much.
Awesome. Looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah. Like I said, I think we connected maybe a couple weeks ago, and I immediately when we connected, we were like, "Oh man, this is about to be it." And we knew that this was going to be a highly engaging conversation. So Irving, I'm going to actually put you on a spot, and I purposely didn't tell you that I was going to put you on a spot, but. And, the slide should have told you that this was coming, but I'm actually going to start a timer because anybody who knows me knows how much I am a stickler about time. I am going to put 90 seconds on the clock, and some way, somehow, I'm going to ask you to tell everyone, why is talking about fair housing important to you? So when you're ready, I will start the clock.
Great. Awesome. I'm ready.
Right.
I think why is fair housing important to me? Because I feel as if that everyone in the world deserves a place to call home. And the fact that we commodify as opposed to necessitize home and having housing, I think that's one of the biggest reasons. I don't think that in our world, in our day and age, that people shouldn't have the opportunity to go to a place where it's safe, where they're able to have like shelter, where they're able to build a foundation. And the fact that we're still having this conversation and it's 2024, it pains me. And I've made this my passion project as to me finding ways to battle like homelessness and fair housing.
Oh man, You got 30 seconds to spare. So I love that. I love that. You did so well. But yeah, all of that and more. And I will just ditto everything that you said and just add to it. I'm gonna go ahead and stop this counter really quickly. But I'm gonna add to that a little bit in terms of like why this is so important to me as well to actually have this conversation.
Yeah.
Most importantly, there's work that I do inside of LeaderKeys that is all about, personal development, career development, leadership development. But I'm also very much, my passion is in community development. And I really think in order for our communities to actually thrive and for the Black community specifically to thrive, we have to invest in what we look like inside of our communities and the share of ownership that we have inside of them. So that's why this is really important to me. And I'm just really excited to actually have this conversation because I don't think it's talked about enough, or it's talked about, I think, perhaps in silos. And that, I think, is something that we really need to remedy.
Agreed.
All right, cool. So I did a lot of research in preparation for this, right? We had a couple prep calls and you gave me some homework. You were like, look at this report and look at this report. And I was like, all right, I got it. So I was doing a whole lot of reading, a whole lot of prepping. And the slides, it's the curriculum designer in me. So there's always going to be some slides. But honestly, they're really just here to keep us, on track and to give us a little bit of structure to this conversation because there's so much to talk about. And as I was doing that research and as you and I were talking, we kind of landed on, and I remember you talking and I was like, okay, here's what I heard you say. There's like 4 pillars. And then when I got into the Sheba report, which is the state of housing in Black America, and as you see on the screen, there's the link to that report. If you do nothing else from this conversation, go out, go get that, download that report. It's free. And educate yourself. Like that is like the number one thing that you should take away. I don't care if you do nothing else. I mean, I do care, but do that, right? Do that. And essentially inside of that report, it also breaks down what we were talking about into these 4 areas of what's happening with the wealth gap in Black America, the home ownership rates, inadequate housing supply, and then housing affordability. And that was kind of like the buckets that we landed on. And we're going to today, just so everyone knows up front, we're going to talk about these 4 buckets in terms of what the challenges are, but we're also going to dig into what kind of solutions already exist and what kind of solutions maybe we should think about creating. Anything to add, Irving, before we move forward?
No, absolutely. I'm ready. Let's go.
All right, let's get into it then. So I wanted to jump in with facts, right? All the receipts. So let's start with the wealth gap. So the median net worth of white households is $250,000, right? And it's more than 10 times greater than the median income net worth of Black households, which is $24,500. I think the first time I read that, I was like, that's got to be a typo. Like,
it's not.
It's not. I don't know. I was astounded by that. And then the other piece of that, it basically said that wealth gap is so great that the 400 richest Americans control the same wealth as 48 million Blacks living in the United States. That's numbers, and that scared the mess out of me.
As it should, but understand that a lot of the wealth comes from real estate, and if we're talking about fair housing, like the Fair Housing Act passed in 1968, where people like us were able to actually attain home ownership or even having a place to rent or live. So I think that if you look at that and understanding the history of our country and the inception of our country, let's just say our country started in 1776, right? At that point in time, we have a discrepancy of almost 200 years of wealth, people being able to transfer wealth, and us starting, let's just say, at 1968 and after that, post 1968. So with that being said, you have to understand that you've had wealth multiply from different generations over and over again. So again, and most of the wealth comes from real estate and insurance. And if we weren't legally able to purchase property at a certain point in time in history, understand that's why that there's going to be that wealth gap. Not to mention also the education aspect and the environmental nuances that we also have to add to it, on top of a bunch of other things that I'm sure that we're going to talk about in a couple of minutes.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, to summarize what you were saying, essentially, I think a lot of the times people use the term of like systemic issues, and that's essentially what you just described. Like we use that term, but people don't actually understand what that is. But that's exactly what that is. There's so many different pockets that have contributed to that. It's not just that, that the imbalance isn't just like the jobs and the types of jobs. It's so much deeper than that. It's much bigger than that. And, and our nation has basically kind of built that in terms of the way we have acted and reacted to major things around race relations in this country. And like it's every single sector. So yeah, thank you for that, because that's a good breakdown of what that actually looks and sounds like in reality.
Absolutely. And we also should look at the legislation too. Look at the legislation from the past and see how that's impacted us and our people, and how we're able to attain certain things, specifically like wealth, homeownership, ownership of certain things, the ability, access to certain things, and then like also look at the timelines and see where we're starting. A lot of people, their misconception is that with the way that the Civil Rights Act and Title VIII and everything else and all of those things, like they don't understand that caused a gap in terms of where we had to come in at. Like a lot of people had a head start, and then we came in halfway in the game where other people already started way before us. So now moving forward is going to take us going twice as fast to even catch up to them. So that we have to educate ourselves at almost twice as much as anyone else. We got to inform ourselves. We got to empower ourselves, and that's what we're talking about today.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when you are starting a race from 2 clicks behind, you're in run mode, right? Yep. You're in run mode. Last night, unintentionally, I watched Cast for the first time. Have you seen that movie?
No, I read the book Cast.
And actually, sorry, the movie is Origins. That's what the movie is, but it's based on the book Cast. I read the book. Wow, so that comes to mind. But I remember reading the book and thinking to myself, I cannot imagine what the author of this book put themselves through in order to do the research to come up with what was inside of it. And then this movie comes out and it basically gives you that answer. But one of the really significant pieces in the book, and they covered in the movie as well, is exactly what you're talking about right now, that catching up from behind. We have things that we say all the time and terms we still use. And this one, coming from the human resources world, we use all the time human resources, which is grandfathering people in. But I don't think people realize where that term comes from. But that term directly relates to this wealth gap, because essentially the term was created. The grandfather rule was that you could not own land unless your grandfather was able to own land. That is generations of inability to even get in the game, to even be in the race at all, right? So like with that grandfather rule, it was in place for a very long time. And that took care, and that was legislation, was the grandfather rule. It applied to housing, it applied to voting, it applied to so many different things. So like when we talk about systemic and talk about the catch up, again, it's designed that way. But now that we are at a point where some of those things no longer exist, again, we're in this run mode of catching up.
Yeah, and that's why it's important for our people, the Black and brown population, to, again, empower themselves, educate themselves, surround themselves with the right professionals, the right network of folks, and just use that network and start building from that network. We can't change the past, but we could definitely impact the future. And the way that we do that is taking that responsibility and not stay in that victimization mindset, but moving forward and empowering yourself by using resources such as like these different groups such as the ARIA, the NARABs, the NARABs, the Alliance, and everything else. And that's just in the real estate world. There's other social groups. If you're in school, you went to a university, I would say join a fraternity of some sort so you could build from that network, or just different BNI groups. If you're at a corporation, if there's any employee resource groups, utilize that so you can empower yourself. You could be around professionals that understand the industry, and you can learn from their experience and leverage their experience and use that experience to basically bolster you and your career too. So it's kind of like you have to be able to navigate your own career or your own life and kind of forget. I hate to use the forgive and forget of the past, but you could remember, but use that memory to also empower your future.
Yeah, that knowledge it's learning, right? Like if there's two pieces to that: not knowing and understanding, and then it's actually taking the action afterwards of applying the lessons learned from that. Right. That's the point of history, which is why we can't erase history and we can't ignore it. We've got to understand and learn from it. I love where you just went in that, because you just opened up a beautiful segue for me. So thank you. Which is I planned on talking about this later, but I'm going to talk about it now because it's a good time, and because you just described what actually happens in the racial justice workshop that LeaderKeys offers. And essentially the ultimate outcome at the end of that workshop is to empower people to be able to go back and to do a community assessment. And we split that into 3 different types of community: your personal community, your work community, and your academic community, or all 3. And essentially what you described, there is usually support and resources within those 3 communities that you can tap into, learn more, leverage, and build upon to create solutions for your specific community. So thank you for that, because that is that's literally the premise. And that's what people walk away from, is a way to go in and learn and understand, and who are the key players, and what do I need to know, and who do I need to connect with, and who the people who are making the decisions, and how do I get a part of that process. That's the outcome.
And I love that. And I love that multi-pronged approach, because that's exactly what it takes, especially when we're talking about fair housing and understand like financial literacy and everything else. Like going in those communities and not only taking away from those communities and letting them pour into you, then taking the data and what you've learned and pour back into those same communities, because that's how you build that village, right? So that's the way that we have to essentially grow. And I wish, I think what you're doing, Latrice, is remarkable work, because you're actually doing it grassroots, and you're giving people the blueprint for them to execute this process flawlessly, right? And the ability to then take this information, retain it, and then give it back. Like, I think that is key. Like LeaderKeys.
It is. Bang, you did it. That's it.
That is a conversion for you.
Yeah, you did. I love it. Thank you very much. I love the intro. This is an unpaid endorsement, by the way. So, but thank you. But yeah, I mean, that is the purpose. And honestly, it is what's underneath the LeaderKeys. It's like this whole gatekeeping concept of knowledge and access and everything like that. Or we can provide the keys and we can start unlocking those doors. Like, exactly. We can do that. Yeah,
the more the merrier. I think our mindset should definitely be the more the merrier, especially when we're talking about the barriers around housing, just the finance aspect of housing, understanding the mortgage process, the GSEs, understanding how to navigate just the different land banking laws, the grants and everything else. I think the more we talk about these, the better it is for the entire community. There are people within our community that knows these things in and out, but they take the information. They want to be hoarders of the information versus being the ones that tells everybody about it, because it's that mindset of the scarcity mindset that, oh, well, if I tell everybody, there's not going to be anything left. No, the more the merrier. The more you tell the people in our communities, the more that they're able to then build, and then they'll build generational wealth. And then you're building the community within the same way. And it comes back to you tenfold, just in karma. Just in karma, it comes back.
Well, I say it all the time. I talk about there's like there's enough room for everybody to win, and winning is actually not an individual thing. When one person wins, there's a ripple effect. We basically all win, right? So like there's no reason for the gatekeeping, but unfortunately, it's just something that just happens. So I'm going to move us along because we are already 20 minutes in, and I feel like we've got so much to cover. So we're going to move from the gap, the wealth gap, into the home ownership rates. And it's interesting because I actually was not aware myself that there was a fair housing month until maybe about 5 years ago. And 5 years ago, I was leading the employee resource group efforts for an organization. And essentially, and the organization happened to be a real estate organization. And essentially, what I went out to do is I went to find some information about home ownership rates aligned to every demographic. So I was looking not even just race-based. So, Black, Hispanic, Asian, Latino, Hispanic. I said Latino, Hispanic, same thing. Not the same thing, but
yeah, you have to.
But I looked also at even the LGBTQ plus, veterans, women, disabilities. Like I went every demographic that you could look at, and just kind of went and just did a data dump, right? And there was like such an interesting story to tell within each one of those groups. And I wanted to empower each one of those groups to tell their stories and to kind of put that on display to educate the organization. That was the goal. When I got to trying to look at some general things around Black home ownership, I was actually astounded that the number hadn't really changed since 1968. And so I had to keep going in and just like digging into that and go, how is that possible? How could we have such a small incremental change in that amount of time? That doesn't make any sense to me. So let's dive into that for a second. And then and I think this will be a good time to talk about even like some solutions around that, like what's going on with that, what kind of conversations around home ownership rates are we having?
Well, that's a very, and that number actually hurts me a lot simply because it's a number that can be moved, but there's just not enough focus on financial literacy at an early age in our environment that basically I think that hinders us first and foremost. Then I think there's a level of post-traumatic stress disorder with the financial crisis of 2008 and 2009 that have a lot of our Black and brown potential buyers or potential homeowners. I think that they're a little bit scared of what can happen because they saw, especially in our communities on the multifamily level, where a lot of people were just put out in the street, a lot of people were ejected, evicted, and it was just a very bad situation. So I think how we approach this in terms of solutions, I think we definitely need to do a better job at educating consumers at an earlier age. I think you and I had a conversation about potentially offering real estate and financial literacy classes at an earlier level, even within high school, like at the sophomore, junior level, so people could understand the process and also take that information back. The students can take that information back to their parents or grandparents or aunts and uncles so that they can be the one that kind of guide them as they are the next generation. And I think that there should be within like the places of worship, I think that we should also have conversations with the members of the congregations or the churches or whomever, and just talk to them about financial literacy, understanding the bequeath process and the estate process, and having insurance on properties, and just making sure that their estate planning is tight, just so like the people that are there understands that transformation and that wealth transformation and all that stuff too. And then I feel as if we need to, as a community, have a conversation with the mortgage companies and HUD and really tell them like our situation and understand that legislatively, FHA years ago, they put laws in place that made it impossible for us to own homes. Like if we look at Levittown and understand that the history of Levittown, where they incentivize builders to build properties and not give it to African American people. I think that that's a systemic issue that has not been yet corrected, and that in itself gave people hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars in terms of wealth that we were just disenfranchised from. So it's a multi-pronged approach where it has to be grassroots, and then we have to take it to the next level and have conversations with the HUD, Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, and the FHA and everyone else to kind of get them to understand that you guys need to do more. You did okay, but that okay is not enough. We need to push a little bit more. Sorry, I get a little long-winded when you start talking about that.
No, it's totally fine. It's totally fine. I feel like in my soul, there's going to be a part 2 to this conversation. So you're fine. There's a couple of things that you said in there, but there's 2 lanes in there that roll up into one, which is education, right? But it's education on both sides. Like there's the side of, okay, here's the things that are actually going on and the things that you're doing, how it actually impacts these communities versus, hey, communities, here's what's going on. Here's how to educate yourself on how you can intercept and actually invade some of these things that are happening. Because a lot of it hasn't even gotten to a point where it's scaled to the point where it's almost part of just like the culture. Like we use the term gentrification, like it's just a way to improve a place. And it's like, wait a minute, do you understand where that came from and what is actually happening and the ripple effect? And every time that actually happens, what that erases and how that resets.
Yep.
It literally resets the clock.
Because of displacement, unfortunately.
It is. I don't know if I even shared this with you, but basically I was born and raised in Compton, California. My husband was born in Chicago and raised in South Central Los Angeles. So we're not from the best of places, right? Which was why it was so highly important for us to understand what it was going to take in order to rise out of those situations. And we're homeowners ourselves, and what that took and where did it, but my husband happens to be a CFA. So like he finances his thing. Numbers are his thing. So like every job he's had, he has learned something, pulled them and brought it back to the house. And this is how we're going to leverage what we've just learned, right? Education is just our driver. But I tell that story to also say that a few years back, we went to California, went home, and we had one of our sons with us, and essentially, he was like, "Oh, I'm going to take him he grew up in Jordan Downs, which anybody who knows knows what Jordan Downs is like. Jordan Downs is where you don't go home if the sun is down, and essentially, it's not there. It's totally not there.
Wow.
And there were dog parks and Starbucks, and we were like, what has happened? What happened here? And then we started talking to friends about like, okay, what happened here? And what was that like when it happened? And the term you used was used so many times, displacement. It was used so many times when people talked about it. And the things that people had to do to maneuver and move around and things like that, like it's literally trauma. So going back to your talking point about that PTSD, that's a very, very real thing about, the mindset of what happens in a community when the community has lived through being completely gutted and replaced. Like that's it's a big thing. So like we have to educate ourselves around this, because honestly, that is the only way we got through that. And it's how my sons are now getting through that as well. I told you one of my sons is actually a real estate agent. It's what he did during the pandemic. He was like, well, he's a musician, and he was like, I can't play. So I'm going to do some schooling. And so he was like, you know what? I need to learn about real estate.
And I love that. And I think more, and that's my job and my role and what I do. I want to expose the youth and everyone, basically everyone and anyone I can, to the real estate world. Like I fell in love with it, and I don't expect everyone to fall in love with the game, but I also know the benefits of having this kind of knowledge, like knowing about mortgages, knowing about financing, knowing about the real estate laws, fair housing, and everything else. I think that is one of the most important things for every family, to have at least one person that's a subject matter expert in real estate, right? Hopefully they choose my company and want to work with me. But if not, if not, it's fine. But I think that's the key, to have that understanding, because you have to understand the largest transaction that you will make in your life is from real estate. And understand that prior to 1968, when Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Fair Housing Act, and he only signed it right after Martin Luther King was assassinated. So understand that, like, real estate is, it's something important. Like it's not, and that's why it's so difficult and there's so many barriers, because if it wasn't important, anyone would be able to get it, right? It's just like anyone is able to get a car loan, but not everyone is able to get a mortgage loan. So understanding the value of real estate and understanding how much it can change your life. And I tell you, it changed my trajectory, right? Speaking from personal, like if my father didn't move from East Orange to Irvington, and from Irvington, and like I can tell you, on my street that I lived on, at least 85% of the friends that I grew up with were either incarcerated or died due to gun violence at a very early age. If they didn't move from Irvington to Maplewood, I may not have been here today. Just because of the environment. And I know it sounds cliche that you're not the product of your environment, but keep in mind, if you plant a bush, if you plant a flower, and it could be the most like the exotic flower, and you plant it in a garden of weeds, guess what's going to happen eventually? Although that flower was the best flower, but the weeds are going to end up overtaking that flower.
Right.
So it's that important for our people, especially in our communities, to understand the value of real estate and how that can change, not your trajectory, but the trajectory of the future generations. Because now I know about home ownership. I've seen them own homes. I know what it takes if you move a person out of an environment and then put them into another environment. And I've also seen, because I went back to that same hood that I grew up in, I've seen a gentrification happen there too, right? I've seen a change. Like our old home is where we sold it. I think it was for somewhere around $90,000 at that time. Right now, it's on the market for $550,000.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And the entire area has changed. And the crazy part about it is the history of that area has now gone too. Like like the next person that moves in there is not going to have that culture. They're not going to understand who Skinny was. They're not going to understand who Omar was. They're not going to understand who Miss Lewis was across the street. They're not going to understand that we used to play Uno on our porches and checkers on our porches. They're not that essence, that culture, that fabric is no longer there. So that's why it's important for us to be able to keep the wealth and also understand the estate process, understanding like when we do get the opportunity to live in a community, to build that community, to support the community, and also empower ourselves to be able to keep the house. Because getting the house is one thing, we got to be able to keep the house.
To keep it. Yeah, my youngest son is always talking about him not being. He was like, I can't wait to raise my kids in your house, and I'm like,
I love it. I love it.
Listen to me right now. Yeah, and I'm like, I raised all y'all, and she's still. Where am I in this equation? That's the first thing. But,
where did I go?
Right. I don't know where I go in that, but I am happy he's thinking that way, in terms of passing down. And he also went through real estate school as well, just for the education. He didn't care about really becoming a real estate agent, but just learning it. And both of them, like they got done with it and was like, how come everybody doesn't do this? Why isn't this a part of curriculum? Like everybody needs it. This is information everyone should know. Like they were blown away. And I wanted to talk about, because actually a catalyst when if you go on the LeaderKeys page, the banner talks about Fair Housing Month, but it has a picture of Martin Luther King on it. And I said, I don't think most people realize how much he fought for fair housing. And in fact, he went to jail more fighting for fair housing than anything else. And that's why fair housing was signed into law a week after he was assassinated, because they were like, oh, the nation's in mourning and blah, blah, we should probably push through this legislation that he really was fighting us for, and that's literally how that happened. But that's how he understood that was the most important piece to move the Black community forward and actually even get to any kind of equity in this nation. Like, he understood that. That's how important this conversation is.
And you got to understand, like, people think that the fight or the reason why, like, he was out there was because of the social issues and everything else. Understand how important the real estate aspect of that was, right? Like, the term NIMBY, not in my backyard, it is something that's so prevalent, and we do it unconsciously, right? Like, someone will say, oh yeah, we're bringing in a new housing project, or we're bringing in a high rise in this area, and a developer is coming here, and the first thing you're saying, I don't want that in my house, I don't want that around me, because the traffic, the kids are going to be in school. So what's the downside to that, right? Okay, all right, you got more traffic, whatever the case may be. You know what else can also happen? Because of the lack of housing in the United States, and specifically in our areas, you're going to have people that won't be able to afford to live in homes or apartments. So guess where they're going to live? In the streets.
Yep.
And we see that all across America.
All across America.
People think that homelessness or the main driver of homelessness is because mental illness, drugs, anything else outside of the sun. But the biggest catalyst to homelessness is the unaffordability of housing. People not being able to afford rent, people not being able to get a mortgage. Understand, those are the two biggest drivers of homelessness. And the picture of homelessness is not always the crazy person with the disheveled hair out in the streets. No. The new picture of homelessness is the kid that's in college that can't afford to pay rent or dorm at the university, and they're living in their car. Or the doctor that's so overwhelmed with student loans and all this other debt that they're living in a car, or they're living with a family member, or they're living with a friend on somebody's couch. Yes, because that's part of homelessness too. Not having or being 5, 6, 7 people in a 2-bedroom apartment, that's part of homelessness too, because if you don't have a place or a bed, technically you're homeless. So people don't understand that that's the face. And if you don't have that social network to support you, and most people don't, believe it or not.
Right.
If you don't have that social network, guess what? You're either living in your car, or you're living out in the streets. And don't think that you're going to find room at these homeless shelters, because there's not enough homeless shelters for the homeless people. Yes. Specifically because the NIMBY process too, because people don't want that in their communities either. So people don't want affordable housing. They don't want homeless shelters. They don't want food pantries. They don't want anything in their backyard that might decrease the value of their property.
Yeah. And you know what's underneath that? It's that they don't actually understand how to run their community. We don't even function as communities. That is the problem. And the communities that do function, and how you don't have that problem. It's a very clear difference. Emmanuel Ochoa once said, and I think there's like a lot of controversy when he said it. He was like, where we got things wrong is that we ended segregation, but we didn't mandate integration. We didn't take the next step. And he's not wrong. He's not wrong.
He's not.
Yeah, he's not wrong.
We're going to stop this. We're going to stop this, but we're not going to remedy it in any way, shape, or form.
No. The only thing that it did is it took signs down. It took, whites only and black only signs. And that's what it did. That's all it did. But it didn't resolve anything in terms of building the foundation of strong communities, which is is why, like, I never can get past that talk track. It was like, but if we don't function as communities, we can't solve these issues, because it can't be, I don't want that in my community. It has to be, what is going to be the best collective solution for us to have an effective community
for
what
human race, for
right.
human race,
for human exactly
for human race.
Right. And it's like, but it's, again, it's biting. I say, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, right? It's that concept. And I think that overwhelms people in terms of like how to move forward and what things to do. That's why I love this talk that we're having, is because we're talking about, yes, here's the issues, here are the facts, but at the same time, here are the things that we can do. And again, to me, it comes all the way back down to education and awareness. It's got to be at least the first step. It just has to be. There's no other way that it can't be.
And being open to change too. Like there's so many things that we need to unlearn about how we think, how we see things, how we do things, specifically in the community. I love the fact that you said that the thought of community has disintegrated, because it has. It's changed a lot. Like we live in our microcosms and we think that's the community, when a community is basically a group of folks that are together, that support each other, that understand each other, that if something goes wrong, that they will band together and no matter what it is, support the next person. And we've lost it. Now it's a social thing, right? It's a power thing. It's more so of a hierarchy than it is about the people. So
it is. And it's interesting because, it's like, we're okay with the concept, if you go down, we go down. But for some reason, we can't seem to be okay with the concept, if we lift you up, we all lift up. And it's like, that's a very weird thing. But to your point, it's the social aspect that actually like pushes us to that, and why we were unable to get to that point. It's one of the barriers. I want to put up the last two facts and then move to solutions. And I'm running through them because we've actually talked about them. You brought it up, right? Yeah, you already said. So the first one is about the inadequate housing supply. That's what we've just been talking about for like the last 2 or 3 minutes, right? Of just housing demand outpacing new home construction. But the shortfall is not just that. It's also what you said about not wanting to have certain types of housing in the community as well. So that's just another fact of the matter that is contributing to some of these issues. And then the other piece of that you also touched on, which is affordability, right? So if you look, according to the Harvard Joint Center for Housing Studies, it means that this high cost that prospective buyers have, they basically need an annual salary of $100,000 to afford monthly payments at just the medium price home range, right? This is as of second quarter 2022. And that the problem with that is that's up over half, just over half from just 3 years ago. So like housing affordability is just crazy out of control as well. So like you pull all of those things together, and this is how we get to where we're at right now.
Yes. And so there's a couple of solutions. I think zoning, like we still have the same zoning that we had back in the 1800s, right? So where people, again, not in my backyard, I don't want multifamilies in my zone. I don't want people to build quadruplexes. So there's a book called The Missing Middle, and it talks about the housing. Like, how do we go for single family to big buildings? What about the 2 families, 3 families, quadruplexes, and everything else, right? Like, understand that those are just as important as anything else. Like, we need that type of housing. And the only way we're able, because guess what? God is not making any more land on earth. So we're not going to get any more land than what it is. So what we need to do is change the zoning laws. There's a bunch of vacant office buildings. There's a lot of single family homes that's on 3-4 acres of land. Like, there's a lot of things that we can change with zoning, and that's going to take education, advocacy, and going out to your local community and really being the conscious person or the conscious constituent that you are, and having those conversations with your zoning boards and your leaders, your governors, your senators, and everyone else, to have them change some of these zoning laws. The zoning board, like, we need more people that have a very good understanding of real estate, and also the state of the economy, and also understand where we are in terms of the homeless population or the unsheltered population. Like, people need to understand where we are in those spaces, and then they can have a conversation about zoning. Versus saying, like, that's my boy or that's my girl, I'm going to put her on a zoning board. Like, we need qualified professionals to be on these zoning boards, right? Because that's why, like, and understand how that changes the community and for the better. Let's just say you allow in Short Hills, right? Let's use Short Hills or Millburn in New Jersey as an example. Imagine if you were to allow on these 2-3 acre lots for people to build a quadruplex, a 4-family home, right? And you give someone a person that's earning 150 or 200,000 that might be from a diverse background, and come in there and have that opportunity to build a family, and then bring in 3 other families that wouldn't have the opportunity to go to the one of the number 1 school systems in the United States that has the highest rate in terms of SAT scores in the United States, and think about the trajectory of that family or those 4 families if you're able to do that.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, no, definitely. It's like there's so much, and we've talked about this before in terms of education and just the. I am always so full of, like, radical ideals, and I'm always like,
you and I both. Remember, that's the consensus we came to.
Yes, we came to that. And essentially, like, one of those radical thoughts is, okay, well, what if there's a 2-step process of the education right into this space, but also what about the recruitment into those types of careers as well? Like, that's, I think, because even when you break down, I was reading this really interesting article, actually unrelated to this talk, but now it feels related. And basically, the article starts off with how Americans are selecting the jobs that they have. And it was very interesting on how it was worded. And it went in, it kept using literally the phrase how Americans are self-selecting into jobs. And so then it broke it down by demographics on how we were selecting to go into jobs. And it was so interesting that they kept using that phrase. But the problem with that phrase is, depending on the situations, a lot of the times your career trajectory is kind of selected for you, right? You kind of have these things that are in front of you, in your face, of what you can do, whether your education level is high school, college, trade school, whatever it is, it's going to be this set thing, or it's going to be the U.S. military, which don't even get me started on that. But but the point is that, like, if there was, like, this effort that said, we're going to put education at the middle school, starting at middle school, of just something that gets in there that starts talking about just 3 things: financial literacy, understanding home ownership, and then the other piece of that of just understanding the way a community is built. That's beyond government and economics, because government and economics actually skips over that whole entire part. And you're like, but what about, like, right here?
Local. Right? It goes state and federal, and it forgets about local, which is crazy.
Completely. It just jumps over it. And so that's why no one actually has any, like, they're not even thinking in that way. It's never even brought up. It's like, we're just not even talking about it. And it's like, okay, but we could, so, like, what if we actually did that? And what if in these career fairs and things like that, at the middle school, the high school, the college, the postgrad, like, what if those things also included careers in these spaces that impacted our communities? What if there was a community wellness career fair? I just made that up. I'm a trademark. So I just made that up.
It's yours.
Well, what if there was that, right? That that, to your point, that changes everything. It changes everything.
I'm
Yeah.
telling you, the earlier we're able, like, as a community, I think the solution is to not wait for people to do it. I think we have to take the onus upon ourselves to start doing it and being proactive, organizing again, going to the churches, going to civic centers, wherever people are, our people are, and having these financial literacy conversations. The professionals in our communities need to go back and reach back and teach the community, the younger population, the older population, and just do it. And watch the benefits. I guarantee you the benefits will be there. Like what you're doing right now is utilizing your audience, Latrice, and getting information about housing, about financial literacy, about professional development, and you're utilizing that to get people galvanized so they can better themselves. It's the same thing that we have to do at a micro level, so then we can then take that information and hopefully we galvanize enough so that it can go out on a macro level.
Yeah, definitely. I have this like weird dream, again, radical ideals, of having like this education tour, and it's titled Barbershop and Beauty Salons, because I mean, we spend hours and we talk a whole lot in those two spaces, right? It's like church and barbershops and beauty salons. Like that's our spaces, right? And again, what if our education efforts started even there? Like there's just like so many interesting.
Shameless plug, NARAB is doing a Black Wealth Tour, 100 city tour. And that's something that, they've taken upon themselves to go into 100 Black cities, or predominantly Black cities, and talk about real estate, talk about redevelopment, talk about how the housing stock needs to change, talk about hiring or contracting Black developers in these areas so they understand the nuances of the communities and keeping things affordable. And understanding how to calculate affordability, which is definitely important too. You can't use an AMI, average median income, if it's skewed, right? There's two different neighborhoods in certain areas where those two neighborhoods could be almost one person's income from this side could be that, and then the other person's income from this neighborhood could be completely different. So we have to be able to calculate those things better, and also understand like those other nuances within our communities, including the education system, like a reform in the education system so that people can learn, like you said, the kids can learn at an earlier age in terms of financial literacy. So
definitely. I was looking at the ARIA, their report, which is the state of the Asian homeowner. And one of the challenges that they have is disaggregation, something that you just explained. Even within your own community, they have this challenge that that Asian is like this huge catch-all. Right. And they were like, there's all different segments that's all up underneath that. But when you lump it all together, you don't get a true representation, and you're not able to effectively tell your story, and so like that's why that's even up here. I mean, my whole comment was to segue us over into these solutions because we already started talking about it, but essentially the bookend of those two things is education and then telling our story so that we get it right and we create solutions on the right stories. Right. So like that's the purpose of this, to make sure that we actually achieve those things. On here, there's a couple of different things. I talked about this Sheba report constantly on here. It was on every single slide. So I hope everybody picked that up and took that. I'm going to put that into the comments. And if you do nothing else, download that report, educate, because that's solution number one, right? Education, that Black Wealth Tour, like look it up, get on the website, find out when it's in your city or somewhere near, do a little traveling, jump on a train, a bus, a plane, I don't care. Like get in it and be a part of that. And if nothing else, maybe enroll into a real estate course. Like that was the most surprising thing about my son. It was like, it didn't cost that much to enroll into a course. It didn't cost that much to actually get his real estate license. And it all happened within weeks. It was weeks in the pandemic. It was one of the things that he did during the pandemic.
Exactly. I love that.
Yeah. So like definitely do that. We talked about a representation, right? NAREB has another really great thing. And NAREB, I don't think we even covered what that is, because you are a realtist as a member of NAREB. But talk about NAREB for just a second, and then we'll talk about the rest of these solutions.
All right, so NAREB was an organization that was formed because NAR, the National Association of Realtors, they basically outlawed African American and women to be part of NAR, the National Association of Realtors, in I think it was 1956. So then NAREB created the National Association of Real Estate Brokers to allow for representation of African Americans in the real estate community. And one of NAREB's number one things has been advocacy and wealth, right? So advocacy in terms of them advocating throughout the entire civil rights legislation, the fair housing legislation, all that stuff. And they continuously are advocating and having conversations with political leaders and also stakeholders when we're talking about the HUD, CFPB, the Fannie Mae, Freddie, Ginnie, Annie, and everyone else. Dr. Courtney Johnson Rose, Madam President, she's been out on a tour, not only doing a Black Wealth tour, but also visiting and having conversations with the White House and everyone else about how a lot of the new rulings that everyone's hearing, how that's going to impact the Black community. So like kudos to NAREB, kudos to NAREB, kudos to ARIA, and kudos to the Alliance and everyone else that's out there doing the very good work that we need to support these disenfranchised communities.
Exactly. And as you just kind of broke down, there's basically a community for everyone. And if you'll think there's a community for you, join a community and be a supporter. Like there's something for everyone. Everyone can be a part of these conversations. So yeah, that representation piece is really, I think it's really important too, and integrating into the ecosystem of the real estate transaction and all of the careers that align up underneath that will definitely be something that I know we at LeaderKeys are going to be focusing on as well in terms of like our efforts in career management and career coaching and things like that, so that we help to drive that conversation, because I think representation absolutely matters, right? That's how you got to be a part of the system to impact the system, period, right? And then a part of that is also that community empowerment piece as well. There's programs that are out there, but I think people have to understand their community and understand what their community actually needs, and then also what things they can tap into, right, in terms of resources. And then that finally, that book of the storytelling, I've been pushing the Sheba report, definitely, but also learn about others. I mean, the storytelling in the NAREP and the Hispanic and the Asian reports is phenomenal. And like, I feel like each report took a different way of approached with telling their story, that if nothing else, if you're not reading those three and picking up nuggets from each one of them, I think collectively it could be really, really powerful in the way that we actually impact communities on a very grassroots level, because they're comprehensive. And I think people need to understand and know these things. So also pick up those two reports as well. I'm gonna put links to everything that we talked about in this session. We have 2 minutes. I can't believe we're already at the end of this.
We got so much more to talk about. We got so much more to talk about.
Yeah, I'm so sad. Any questions that have come through, and definitely I have booked some space to ask us anything, but definitely you're gonna have to put those questions inside of the chat. Mm-hmm. And we will be very happy to address any questions or thoughts that anybody has. But I want to wrap up this last minute with just some final thoughts that you may have. I put my final thought up on here because I thought I took this quote straight out of that report that basically says gaining access to home ownership is one of the most direct and immediate ways to step out of the revolving door of generational economic stagnation. I loved the way that was pulled together. And that's my final thought. What is your final thought?
My final thought, first and foremost, I want to thank you, Latrice, for utilizing this platform and asking me to be on your platform to empower people and empower our communities. I think that's so important. And my final thought would be that home ownership isn't like, it's not something that's a commodity, right? Owning a home or renting a home is not a commodity, right? It's a necessity. And think about your neighbors, think about these human beings that may be out in the streets on a daily basis. Before you make any decision, think about your neighbor and how that can impact, and what you say or what you do, how that impacts them. And just look at it from that perspective versus the financial perspective. And I guarantee you great things will happen. We'll build a great community and sustainable community and a better community.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. Irving, thank you so much for being here today. Like I said, I know there's a part 2 in the future. So when you are ready, I'm ready. so we'll plan it out. We'll do something. I would love to have you back. On behalf of LeaderKeys, thank you so much. And we definitely will be continuing to chat.
Yep.
With that said, everyone, thank you for attending.
Shout out to Paula for putting us together. Paula for the people.
Shout out to Paula Young, the amazing Paula Young. I mean, I'm sure many of you are going to go out and follow Irving and I, but make sure you also follow Paula Young and just put any of Paula Young anywhere. You'll find the right one, because she is the GOAT, and she is the one who put us two together and said we needed to know each other, and she was right. so yeah, shout out to Paula for this. For everyone else, thank you very much for joining us today. I'll leave our poster up a little bit. Remember to follow LeaderKeys on each platform. We're on LinkedIn, we're on Facebook, we're on YouTube, where you're going to see these replays of all of our events. And we're also out on Instagram acting up as well. So with that said, thank you for another authentic and unapologetic conversation. I gotta get better at saying my own title. You got it. And I look forward to seeing you all next month. Thank you again, Irving.
Take care.
You too.